Welcome to the Digital Hive podcast, where we talk all things digital marketing. I'm Emma, a marketing strategist and coach for business owners who aren't short on ideas but want support with the strategy and tactics to get their message out into the world. My guest today, Jillian Bright, is an author, copywriter, messaging strategist, and fractional CMO who helps authors, creatives, and values driven businesses refine their messaging and build marketing systems that support their unique values, capacity, and goals. Welcome to the podcast, Jillian. It's so good to have you.
Hi, thanks, Emma. It's great to be here.
Kick us off. Tell us about you and your business.
Okay. I'm Jillian Bright. I'm a conversion copywriter, messaging strategist, and fractional CMO. And I help small businesses across industries who are kind of do good businesses and have positive messages to really refine their verbal identity, their messaging, and have stronger, more simple, effective marketing so that they're really having the impact that they want to be having.
So tell us about that verbal identity. How does that work?
Yes. So verbal identity. We are all familiar with visual brand identity, but verbal brand identity is a lot more abstract. So I like to explain it in this way. If you go to a party, what you wear is your visual brand identity. What you say is your verbal brand identity. So how you look, your logo, we all know that that is not enough. Your logo is not your brand identity, just in the same way that your 3 brand voice keywords are not your verbal brand identity. So if your visual is how you are recognized, it's how people see you and like, oh yeah, that's that company. Well, your verbal brand identity is how you are remembered. It is how you stick in people's heads when they see your content, hear you speak. It's what makes you stand out. And now with a lot of AI making things flat and it all sounding the same, it is so important that your verbal brand identity has that unique factor that is really you and your business.
So how did you get to this point? Did you always have this as your business, or did you do things prior and then find that this was like your special sauce?
A little bit of both. I have always been a writer. I have been a content writer for the last 20 years. I'm an author. 6 years ago, I decided I wanted to start copywriting. And so I started doing that. And I found myself more and more drawn to brand copywriting and messaging and brand voice. And I really loved working with businesses to help them get that really clear, because everyone seems to think that you find your voice, and that is not true. You develop your voice. It's not the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's like a gem that you have to excavate, cut, and polish. And so it became the part of copywriting process that I loved the most. And so it just naturally developed into doing a little bit more consulting, brand messaging guides, and however things work these days, because there's a lot of change in the industry. So it's a very flexible role, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. So on that point, what has changed in the last 5 to 10 years? Like, why is this becoming more important for business owners?
This is a great question. So as more and more, well, let's say it's going to be different from industry to industry, first of all. If you are an online business, you will certainly have noticed the changes over the last 5 years, going from, if you were just in business from 2013 to 19, you could probably get by. Then the pandemic happened, there was an explosion, and then boom, everything dropped off. And now we're in this very interesting age of AI. So there has been this pattern of more people getting into business. And of course, the more people that are in business, the more important it is to stand out and be uniquely you. And I say you because there's probably a lot of solopreneurs, service providers, but you as your business. And I think the biggest changes have now happened in the last couple years with more and more businesses using generative AI. It's made it so much easier to scale your content creation, get more out there, be more visible. It's easier. It's almost free. But if you don't have these key components, it doesn't matter if you have a human team creating your content or AI creating your content. It's going to be really difficult to stand out. And if you can't stand out in today's market, chances are your business is going to struggle a little bit.
Yeah, no, I see that a lot with businesses. It's really important to use tools like AI where it can save you a lot of time, but you never want to like write me a blog post and then you just publish that because it's just going to sound like AI. And also it may have made up a few things along the way.
Oh.
Um, case studies that don't exist. So how you can like refine that back. And for someone who is maybe like starting out or getting more, they're in the earlier phases of writing copy for their business, um, it can be hard to nail down those things of like what makes your business different than another business, and makes it uniquely you. How do you work with business owners to find those things that are uniquely them?
I think it's a very tailored process to each business, and it's a lot of conversation, and it can happen, over Voxer. It can happen over an actual Zoom call. It can happen face to face. It depends on, everyone's capacity. But it really is a matter of listening. Like, I'm going to use myself as an example, my trained ear listening to you talk about your business, and I can pull out pieces that I know are standout, important pieces that are valuable and that make you different. When you are, I could not do this for myself. For example, I have to have someone help me with this because it's just too hard to do it for your own business. But having someone reflect back at you like, no, this is really important. This is not common, but you might think it's common because you spend every day in your business. Um, you don't understand that that's something that really is a differentiating factor. So just listening and pulling out those pieces is really important. Another piece is paying attention to what your audience resonates with. You could love a piece of your brand, but it doesn't really resonate with your audience. So that doesn't mean you need to eliminate it. It just means you need to address it. Like, why isn't this really important piece of my brand? Why isn't it resonating with my audience? Is there an education gap? Is there an awareness gap? Is there a shift in values that I need to, reflect on? So it's very different, but it's important to honor the process and especially the listening part of the process, whether that's someone listening to you or you listening to your audience.
Mm. How does brand values come into this? Is that related in how they would show up in this way?
Yes. Yes. I love this question. So I have had several business owners ask me, like, oh, I didn't think brand values were important until I start building a team and I need to have my values with team culture. And I said, okay, I don't know if it was the 2025 or the 2024 report on marketing that was saying that values are one of the most important things that people buy on. Like, yes, money, price, the very next thing they look at, and sometimes the very first thing they look at is values. People are only buying from brands, unless we're talking about like essential goods, right? Um, Gas, food, that kind of a thing. But most people are only buying from brands that are values aligned. So if you are not even just talking about your values in your marketing, but if you are not showing your values, you may not make that sale. So that it's really important to know and demonstrate. So it's not performative. And so it's really, really, really obvious to your people that, oh yeah, this is what I want. This business is really aligned.
Yeah. And with that note of like performance and authenticity, how do you help business owners to once they've decided what their brand identity is and you've figured that out, how do they bridge the gap, shall we say?
Yeah. I think when we think about brand values, we think, oh, integrity, creativity, simplicity, efficiency. And so one of the things that we do as we're figuring out their brand identity is, okay, do you, how? How are you applying that value in your business? And that is what bridges that gap. Because if you say, well, creativity is a value. Okay, great. How do we do that? Well, we make sure that our marketing campaigns are fresh and exciting. We make sure that our offers resonate with that value of creativity as well. We make sure that how we deliver, and it's making sure that every single touch point, literally every single touch point from the very first time that someone comes into contact with your brand, every single one, all the way through to post purchase, after you're done with either the sale or the service or whatever it is, making sure that afterwards too, you are still bringing in that value. So how are you creatively reaching out to past clients to see if they could use your assistance, your work a year later, 6 months later,
Mm.
that kind of thing. So it's the how really bridges that gap.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, when people pick their values, they often pick, one word instances.
Hmm.
So like creativity,
Hmm.
that could mean something so different to so many different businesses. And so like
Yeah.
having that like paragraph of what it means, like, is it creativity for you as the business owner that you get creative and, maybe as a business, you're designing logos. And so every business is like every logo is creatively different to each other and all of those kind of things. Or is your business more about allowing the business owner that you work with to be creative or the end consumer to be creative? Like, you could make watercolor sets, but they're not necessarily like the numbered colors situation. Like, it's more about how do people get creative with the product. So everything needs that extra little explanation so that you
Yes.
can live it fully. Um, and then you bring the team element in. Like, not everyone's role. Like, can your bookkeeper stay creative in their role? Probably not. Creative accounting can sometimes land you in some places that you don't want to be. So it's like having those, yeah, having those descriptions, but then through that process being like, where in your service offering or your product, where are you allowing that creativity? Then also has that documented so that you can then talk about it across all of those different instances.
Yes.
Rather than it being on an index card that you then put in a drawer and never look at again. Which
Or worse, like on
happens.
your homepage or on your about page, and that's all it is. It's just a statement right there, and there's never
Yeah.
the embodiment of that value.
Or yeah. I've seen businesses where like, they have it on a PDF that's on their server and then they walk the new employees through it or whatever. And then you kind of never see it again. So it's like
Yeah,
living it, but then also
yeah,
talking about them.
absolutely.
And how you talk about them is that brand identity. Um,
Yes.
yeah. So with a lot of businesses, especially if maybe they did something like this 5 years ago or they've done a project on this at some point, when do you know that you need to work on it?
I used to say that you needed to review it once a year. Uh, Things are changing so fast in marketing, especially if you use social media as one of your primary channels. You should probably be reviewing it every quarter. It needs updating. People's perspectives are shifting real quick. Lots of cultural shifts happening, lots of big things happening in our world that your brand needs to decide how to respond to. Like, for example, when the pandemic happened, I recommended all of my clients go look at your messaging. How are you going to respond to this issue? Because you're not going to be talking about things in April 2020 like you were December 2019. So, big moments externally, big moments in your business, and also periodically, you need to be reviewing it. You don't need to necessarily do like an overhaul, but you need to be reviewing it. Definitely.
Yeah. I also just like the idea of even on a monthly basis when you're
Yeah.
checking in on your analytics. Hopefully, a lot of businesses are doing that where they're checking where they're at with certain things, just so they don't go on a tangent of doing lots of things that they don't maybe need to do,
Yes.
um, or thinking something's working when it's not. Is that you also just have that gut check in of like, how were we this month at our delivery of our phrasing of things? Did we hit all of our key points? Because within that, you might have, 8 different, things that you want to talk about. Maybe not 8 different brand values, but maybe you
Yeah.
have 4 brand values that you want to make sure that you're focusing on. And you can very quickly, especially if you're diving into things like trends on Instagram, get to a point where for the last 3 months, you actually haven't talked about it at all. And then those kind of things kind of disappear. And people need that repetition to understand it. So therefore, if you don't talk about it, I find often a lot of businesses are like, I'm sick of talking about XYZ. And it's like, yeah, you're sick of talking about it because
Yes.
you live it every day. Your core customers only receive like 10 to 20% of that information. And so they've forgotten. So,
Yes.
like repeating things in a launch cycle is completely fine. But also you have those instances where certain people might have like co-opted the same language that you use and so it's becoming watered down. um
Yes.
a like the understanding of the definition of a word has changed and you use that word and therefore maybe it's not really aligning anymore. A trend has popped off that kind of like pulls a little bit of distraction. Any of those kind of instances are things that aren't as big as, say, a pandemic, but they are a shift that could impact how people understand your business when you talk about these keywords that you've used for 5 years, but maybe it's time to either change them or just clarify what you mean. Make sure that is coming across clearly, because sometimes we use these phrases that should explain exactly what we do. Digital marketing is one that is used everywhere. And to the point where you might be a digital marketing strategist, for example, like myself, but what does that actually mean? Because as we digitize so many parts of our lives, that maybe means something different over time, and it definitely will in 5 years. That will mean something completely different.
Absolutely. I mean, think about the buzzword like authenticity.
Yes.
Words get language is living, words change. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I can see a time in like 5-10 years where authenticity, that word will make people think of manufactured authenticity. But for now, we want the authenticity. We want that and we want to keep it within our businesses. So as much as you want to be checking in on what you're doing, you don't necessarily want to be like, every 5th post is about this thing.
Right.
So it's having a little bit of fluidity in there, but making sure that you don't go 6 months without ever talking about something that's really important, because that could be something that someone is looking for but doesn't see. And so therefore you don't make that sale.
Yes.
Yeah.
On top of that, I want to add that when you post things on, let's say Instagram, you post something on Instagram that's really core to your brand, a brand value, and it doesn't get great engagement, that doesn't mean you shouldn't post on this. It just means that you have to expect that those kinds of posts are not going to get great engagement. If they're getting really, really bad engagement, maybe that is something to look at, like I said before. But it doesn't mean you should stop those kinds of posts just because they're not performing as well. They're still crucial to the entirety of your strategy. Like you're saying, the repetition is really important, even if that's not a post that you're doing for like a visibility or something like that. You still need to be, you still need to be communicating those things.
Yeah. And you can also test out little like different formats or ways of saying it. Because a lack of engagement isn't necessarily the same as like a negative response.
Yes.
Because occasionally you can have that too. And then that is probably a more quick adjustment that you need to make. But sometimes we have those instances where you're like, oh, I really thought that was going to hit and people were really going to love that. And they didn't. What can I change about it so that it's more interesting to people or whatever? The core message might stay the same, but you just need to try a different format. And then unfortunately what will often happen is that format will slowly become not as punchy and then we move on. But that's where that creativity comes in. So if that is something that people find interesting, which it often is, we don't want to be reinventing the wheel, but we want you to be, creative sometimes.
Yes, absolutely.
So how can businesses establish their verbal branding if they were to be thinking about this on their own? Maybe in preparation of working with someone like you, how can they start to think about how this would embody their business well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is one of the places where AI really shines. You can take all of your top performing content. You can take anything from emails. I used to do this manually. This is how I'm saying this is really a great place to use this tool. Take all of these things that perform really, really well and feed it into AI. Ask for, phrases that repeat. Ask for all kinds of things, from phrases to sign-offs to values to tone. We can get real nerdy here, and I can talk about lexical density and cadence and all kinds of things, which are pieces of verbal branding, but no one's going to care about that unless they're a copywriter. But AI can pull that out for you. So it can actually, just like you have a hex code on your color, so you're not telling your designer, dark teal. You can say, okay, this content is at a 4th grade reading level with a lexical density of 76% and a cadence of, 6 words per sentence. And it does everything from and so you can break this down. And so you can then tell AI when it's making content for you, or you can write it in your brand guide for people and they can cross check. But it can pull all these like really nitty gritty pieces out so that you can either write for yourself and cross check or have AI help you generate content that is actually like on brand. And these are the things that make you sound like you that a lot of people aren't aware of because, you know, it's language. Not a whole lot of people study language at this level. So that's where you can start. Just getting those standout pieces. And then once you know that, keep trying those things, try to replicate those things on purpose. And that's where you start, really. Especially if you're in your earlier phases where things tend to change a lot. If you are more established, you probably have a lot of these numbers or a lot of these details. But I still think that putting these things into AI and asking for those very specific representations of your verbal brand identity can be really like, oh, wow, that's so cool. I did not know that I wrote at an 8th grade rating level instead of a 4th, or these kinds of little things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I really find that interesting in terms of like the grade level, because for some businesses, it's really important that you keep it as simple as possible. And then for some businesses, you need to use the jargon so that people know that you are in the industry or what have you. And things like that can be really a big change for people in terms of it either resonates with your audience or it doesn't because of that. And it's not that your audience can't read above a 4th grade level. It's that it connects with them on a basis where, you know, sometimes you want your brand to come across as easy and simple and comfortable and all of those types of things. And therefore, you know, you might be making puzzles or something like that. You don't need to talk about, like, people can feel the quality of a puzzle, but it's not necessarily like the thing that you put on the front of it is like the GSM and the whatever else. Like, it's important, but it's not front and center. For some businesses, you know, say you're a printer, that kind of information of what you're able to print is really important. So it just depends on the business of where you want to sit in that. And sometimes, depending on your own personal personality, you will lean into one or the other.
And platforms too. You know, when you switch from email to website to Instagram to LinkedIn, it's going to shift a little bit. And so having those numbers and be like, oh, okay, we need to take it from a 2nd grade to a 4th grade or from a 7th to an 8th. And just these little bitty tweaks. And like, I think a lot of us do it without thinking, almost like, you know, when you go to dinner at a super fancy restaurant versus like a diner, you know, obviously the way you show up is going to be a little bit different, even though you're still you. Yeah.
Totally. And also there are ways that if your audience is at a certain stage, but you want your potential client, like by the time they're booking, say, a discovery call with you or anything like that, that they know about certain things so that you aren't having to convince them of the validity of a certain thing. You know, I don't personally work with people who don't think marketing works, because why should I have to convince you that marketing works? Otherwise, everything will be a fight the whole time.
No, I was going to say, I don't work with people who don't think words matter. Like,
exactly.
We're not going to be a good fit.
Yeah. So you can have those either tests throughout the process or education throughout the process. So you can have things like the way that you talk on your public platforms can be a little bit different to how you talk in your email newsletters, because you've had a welcome sequence that introduced people to certain topics. And so if they followed along through the welcome sequence, they understand kind of like the inside jokes or the they're in with the in crowd of your business, of knowing how these things work, but understanding that not everyone on your Instagram stories is going to understand that. That can be really important too, of just like, how do you show up where? And something like a a verbal brand identity can really allow people to make those designations along the way. Yeah. So how can businesses decide what kind of person they want to work with? So they decide they want to work with someone on their verbal identity. How can they find someone that is a good fit for them?
I think the first thing the business would need to ask themselves is, what are our goals? Are we doing this because we have a launch coming up and we need to make sure that everything is right so we can optimize sales? Or are we about to do like a brand marketing or a PR campaign where we want to get lots of visibility? The way you're going to approach this is a little bit different, because there's a lot of different either independent contractors or service businesses that can help you get this verbal brand identity. Um, Anywhere from a messaging strategist to a launch strategist to a copywriter to, a brand voice specialist. There are lots of different ways that you can get there. But when you know your end goal, you can pick the best person to help you get where you want to go based on your goals. So that's kind of high level general advice, but definitely look at your goals first and see what's going to be the best one for you, the best path.
Yeah. And I think with any kind of service provider, it's also figuring out what are they going to give you. Every
Yes.
business owner has their own service. So some people are going to give you the verbal brand identity, but then not actually help you bring it into your business. Other businesses
Mhm.
will do that. Just like any visual brand identity as well. Some people will design the logo and all of your core things, but then they don't work with you as a graphic designer ongoing. So they're not going to help
Mhm.
you with your packaging and things like that. It's
Right.
often really important to find either someone who can do both or who, they have someone either on their team or that they regularly work with. There's often brand designers who have collaborations with website
Mhm.
designers where they
Yeah.
work with them regularly. So they're very good at turning that brand identity into the website. Same as like a copywriter and a website designer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because we often don't want someone who can do everything. We do want to pull together a few specialists and have them do their thing. And so it's some of it is deciding that, like, what are the parameters of who I want to hire right now?
Mhm. Yep.
And what is their skill set? But I wonder, and you can talk about this, but I wonder how do you want to work with someone who has worked with businesses like yours before? Or do you want to work with someone who has worked with a lot of different businesses, but you can tell how they like stand out? How does that work? Do people come to you and they're like, I want a brand identity like so and so?
Uh, I think if anyone ever told me I want a brand identity like so and so, my first question would be, why?
Yeah.
Why do you
Yeah.
want to sound like them? And gently guide them towards what makes them special, what makes them stand out. But that said, I think there is value in both. If you have a very specialized industry, say you have, I don't know, to get really special, medical device sales, medical, tech, these are industries that you probably want to work with someone who is familiar with your industry, who's familiar with the jargon, who's familiar with, like we were talking about earlier, the grade level that's important, these things that are very industry specific. If you are an online service provider, if you are a product salesperson, these are things that you can be a little bit flexible. You can probably find someone who you just think, wow, I'd really like to work with that person. They do great work. Definitely vet the person, make sure that, if they don't have experience in your industry, do they have a demonstrated ability to be very diverse as they move? Or does everyone kind of sound the same? It's almost like, I don't know, probably like Hollywood people looking for an actor. Like if you're looking for a very specific role, you're probably going to go to someone who plays that kind of a role well. But otherwise, you're probably just going to, generate that kind of role again unless you can really look outside the box. So, specificity or diversity, you have to decide which one's more important to you, to your
Mm,
business.
yeah. No, I think that's really important. But sometimes you can't, like, often people will say, looking at a website and they're like, I like this style and this style and this style. And then we find the commonalities. What I would recommend to people is that you go outside of your industry for those kind of things rather than looking at your direct competitors and then being like, I like this is, a business that is very much not a cafe. Thinking about if your business and your brand was a cafe, what would that feel like? Because it gets you out of your own head in terms of what it feels like. Like my business as a cafe would feel very differently to another marketing strategist as a cafe. Like, would there
Yeah.
be gaming in the back and like, all of these things? Well, for me, it would be more like matcha and there would be like honey based scones and like there would be area for people to like spread out and, like the tables would be large, not small, so that you could have enough room. Other brands would be like, we have, you know, these tight tables, but then there's lots of room to move around between them. Like everything is different. And it can help you to think of it in those different ways. But if you think, you know, only looking at your competitors or the other people that your business could compete against, sometimes it can limit that kind of thought process.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's
Yeah.
really important that the differentiation factor is included. Like whichever way you go, you have to make sure that there's something stand out, that it's only you.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Whatever your unique selling proposition is. But also I think a lot of people shy away when the USP is just like how they operate. You know,
Hmm.
like it's if how you operate is one-on-one, like the Voxer situation, like
Mhm.
from a voice recording, you can tell when someone starts talking about something that they kind of like feel like they have to do
Oh yeah.
to something that they're really excited about.
Yep.
And so the different ways that you bring that through in your process is really interesting because it helps the people who maybe haven't figured it out for themselves what
Oh
those
yeah.
differences are, that you
Yeah.
can pull that out rather than just being a sounding board. You can also be pulling those things out of them.
Yeah.
And those kind of things can be really important, especially when people start making comparisons between different businesses where they need to work with someone. Some businesses are set up to where the person needs to come with everything and then you you know finish it for them,
Hmm.
but other businesses are will figure it out along the way.
Yep.
And that is a big thing. As a decision maker, you need to know where you're at, um because anything like this and anything that people do in their business is an investment, and you don't, you know doing your due diligence to figure out that you're not gonna have to do this with
Yeah.
3 different people to figure it out,
Right.
that you can have those discovery calls and then make a decision is really
Yes.
important.
That's a
Yeah.
huge piece. If someone is not willing to get on, I mean, when you typically work with anybody who's going to do verbal brand identity with you, you're making a sizable investment, whether it's a copywriter, a PR person. If they're not willing to get on a call with you and to get to know your business before they get started, I'm not talking about sample or free work, but like to get to know your business. If they're not willing to do that beforehand, especially in today's market, I would be very, very, very hesitant to work with that person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that goes for any kind of service where you're going to be
Yeah.
working with that person one-on-one.
Yes.
Um, if you were gonna hire someone as an employee, you would do an interview first.
Yeah.
And you wanna talk to that person and get to know that person as much as humanly possible, without taking up too much of their time,
Right.
before you make that decision. But going into it knowing those things about your brand, like how you wanna show up, what your brand values are, um, what your unique selling points are, you might find
Mhm.
out different ones along the process. But having a bit of an idea can help just to make sure that everything stays relevant and authentic throughout that
Yeah.
process and that it doesn't get
Yeah.
shifted too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. With this kind of like change with trust that has happened over
Mm.
the last 5 to 10 years, how are you finding that is impacting your work?
There is a there is a larger awareness gap these days that I feel like I'm having to do a lot more education and diagnostic content to help people understand how important this is, the trust factor. We've always like I think is one of the first thing anybody learns when they start business that they have to market themselves. Know, like, trust. Like, oh, we know we have to get them to know, like, and trust us. And I think there has been this overemphasis on know and like because business has mostly been good. Now we're in a place where people don't have the capacity or they don't have the resources. And so trust has become hugely important. And so I feel like there's still a lot of businesses operating on the trust signals from 3 to 5 years ago, as opposed to trust signals that are important to people today. There are businesses that I know that have been operating for years and they still don't have like a privacy statement or the terms, like just little things that are really important. If you don't have like how we use your data, how we process this. If you don't have, and this is also legal and issue in some countries, like if you don't have the immediate, you can easily unsubscribe at any time, like on your opt-in page. Like these are all trust signals that need to be addressed and updated. How are you speaking? Is there any like FOMO? Is there any false urgency, any manufactured scarcity? Like these are things that people have become aware of. Lots of people have been burned. And if you are still using any of these tactics or strategies, even with good intentions, the chances that you're breaking trust is probably pretty high, and it may be costing you sales.
Yeah, totally. Which are the more recent trust things that you've seen people, like fall into traps of leaning on?
I would say some of the big ones are getting someone onto your email list and assuming that they want and they are already warm and engaged. Most of the time now, when people are getting on their email list, they are not coming in from a neutral position. They're coming in from a cynical position. And they may not be giving you clear signals. They may not unsubscribe right away. They may just go like radio silence. So you have to meet people where they're at now. That's a big one. I see another big one with calls to action and using something that's either too soft or using something that's too aggressive for your audience. Again, that goes back to listening, both to your audience and to your data. Those are the two big ones. I think that the general thing is just not meeting people where they're at right now and what people need right
Yeah.
now. And that can
Yeah,
change,
totally.
but yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing a lot, I mean, especially in the e-commerce space of like, I've signed up to your email list and then I've browsed something on your website and now you're attacking me from all angles of, do I still
Yes.
want to buy this?
Yes.
Um, Abandoned cart flows are important. We don't want to annoy people with our abandoned cart flows.
Yes.
So it's those kind of situations of where are we overstepping? And some of that will
Hmm.
come back to your values.
Hmm.
Um, because some businesses are sell, 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 and some businesses are, sell when the person has shown signals that this would be really good for them.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's also different instances where along the way you can share about the quality of the product,
Yeah.
um, share about, who is making the product, those kind of things that are more likely to tip someone over the edge in terms
Hmm.
of piquing their interest that little bit more. Sharing about your returns policy, anything like that. It's
Yeah.
not just a reminder because it's not always that they got distracted and didn't pull out their credit card.
Yeah.
Especially with Shopify and Shop Pay, like people don't
Hmm.
even have to get their card out a lot these days, and with Apple Pay and things like
Yeah.
that. Um, so how can you look at a situation and go, why might someone have not finished this process, and how can I fill that gap with educational interest instead of how do I remind them and like offer them a 10% code?
Yeah.
How can I make this a little bit more interesting so that they don't, um, lose a little bit of that trust along the way?
Yeah.
Because
Clarity.
those tiny little things will add up.
Hmm.
Just as much like the tiny annoyances will add up, just as much as the tiny extra pieces of information that would make them more interested in the product can add up.
Yes.
Um, so how you approach those different things can be really important, and it just depends on like, you know, have you done that work to figure out what those things are that you can
Hmm.
verbally deliver to people,
Hmm.
and how much of it is just like using a template from an email marketing software about what
Yes.
a newsletter should look like.
Yes.
How can you figure that out for yourself? um and some of that can be figured out through analytics and talking to people and all those kind of things, and some of it
Hmm.
can be that gut check of how could I improve this experience for people.
Yes.
um yeah. Do you have any stories for us of like businesses where they've gone through and done their brand identity and figured out different things that have then, like either unlocked something in their brain or unlocked something in their business, and they've kind of like, you know, had a massive impact? Do you want to tell us about any fun stories like that?
Yeah. I have a couple, but I worked with a fine artist for about 2.5 years, and they decided that he wanted to do not just paintings, but he wanted to develop a luxury plushie based on the paintings that he was most famous for. And so it was going to be a sub brand, and it was going to be a different voice and a different verbal identity, a different brand identity, but it still needed to be, connected to this original brand. And so I got to help them develop the whole thing from start to finish. And it was at the beginning, like, well, we think it'll be this, we think it'll be that. And we sat down and we really talked about what made it different. We really talked about where the artist's passion was in creating this new plushie. And we mapped it out in a whole very extensive messaging guide. And then they decided to go to a very expensive branding company. And the branding company goes, we're not really sure what you need us for because you've done everything that we would already do. So that was a fun moment. And they thought, oh, wow, like we know more about our business than we think we do. We are more capable than we think we are. And we ended up not outsourcing to a 6-figure branding company. And they just signed a licensing deal to one of the top 4 toy companies in the world for a $5 million 5-year licensing deal. And so it was just like this really exciting journey to see how important that piece of it was, and like what you can do, what you can achieve when you have the details and you really understand like all of the special pieces of your business.
It's amazing, like the doors, physical and metaphorical, that will open up with that clarity.
Yes. Yes.
Because when you sit down at your computer, you know what you're moving towards. If you're maybe not quite there yet, but you know where you're headed. You know how to write that newsletter, even if you are fiddling around with different formats, because you know that core and you know what you're saying. That can be transformational, and in some instances can get you that $5 million 5-year deal.
I mean, there's a lot of other stuff
really
that goes into getting the deal, but
yes,
it doesn't happen without this stuff that makes you really stand out special. Yeah.
Yes. But when you show up unclear because you don't have that clarity, it can get a little bit mixed. You show up to that meeting and they go, oh, but is this going to evolve over time? And that's going to be a costly exercise. Just as much as, you have a product that you iterate over the years, all of those iterations can cost a little bit of money. And so having that clarity, the clearer you are from the outset, and then you do need to take some steps, because we don't want to wait until we are 100% clear, but we've made zero progress. So it's finding that balance, having that stop for that check-in, and then, taking it forward. But with the confidence and clarity that you know where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having that clarity on the things like your identity, your brand, whether it's the visual, the verbal, whatever, it can really act as a compass. Like your messaging is such a huge piece of your brand, and it can define everything from what kind of offers you develop, the kind of products that you decide to sell, how you sell it, who you hire.
And sometimes it looks like just sitting there and knowing what happens when you sit down at your computer.
Yes. Sometimes it's just about making content that's like, oh, I can sit down and create something that is really quick to create and easy to post. And that has a lot of value as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that kind of links in with how I work with people too, because that is, with the strategy and coaching, that is how I operate with people, is that ultimately after we work together, like I'm always around, but the idea is that they can do their marketing on their own now, and they can make those decisions on their own. Because in a way, I've really just been a guide through that process, and that they know what they're doing and they know how they can show up in these different ways. That they then have that removal of the overwhelm. They have their systems in place. They know what to do. And they also know what to do when a platform evolves, like Instagram randomly announces something new, or TikTok does, or whatever. How they will then adjust, because they have that clarity to start off with.
Yeah.
And a lot of those services that people will work with in their marketing, that are a potentially like more of a one and done kind of a process, that is the aim, is that it sets you up to that next level, and allows you to make that progress. And then there are also other services around there that, you work with on an ongoing basis, and that really
Right.
helps you in a different way. So, some of this is about knowing what you want to get out of it, and then
Yes.
picking the right person.
Picking the right person. Exactly. And I think too, this is when I work with people, it can be one and done, or it can be an ongoing that we just have like little bitty touch-ins as we go, just because it's, things do change. And it can be really helpful to have that person be like, hey, you did this work for me. Can I just ask you a quick question? Or can we just have a quick sit down and do something, rather than having to either do a whole nother project or find someone else and update them on the thing. And sometimes that's, you can't avoid it. But if you already have someone in your business that knows how you work, that knows how things are, that knows your audience, it's so much easier to be like, hey, quick question. Great. I've got a quick answer.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's cheaper to work on work on your existing website over time every year consistently than it is to every 3 to 5 years like pay
Oh
a
my
whole new
goodness.
designer to
Yes.
start from scratch.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. So tell us, where can people find you?
You can find me on my website, jillianbright.com, and I've got all my socials linked there. I'm mostly on LinkedIn for my marketing, my Instagram. I talk about all the things from my books to life in Italy to marketing and all the things. So it's kind of a jumble, but it's more fun over there. I also have a podcast that's just like little mini voice notes from me, 10 to 15 minutes, Bright Brand Marketing. And it's really focused on messaging, brand voice, and verbal brand identity.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This was a great conversation.
Thank you,
Really
Emma.
good.
Yeah, it was really great.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Digital Hive podcast. I hope you enjoyed this chat about verbal branding and have a few takeaways to implement into your own business. Remember, though, that you never have to implement everything you hear about on the show, so think about what is best suited to your business right now and tailor the approach for you and your audience. Find more about Jillian and a special deal for Digital Hive podcast listeners at jillianbright.com/digitalhive. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd truly appreciate it if you could share it with a friend or on Instagram and tag me at Honeypot Digital. To find out more about Honeypot Digital and the marketing strategy and coaching work I do, or to find more marketing resources, head to honeypotdigital.com.